Stella Tennant was more than just a supermodel. She was a symbol of beauty, style, and timeless elegance. But behind the flawless photos and radiant smiles was a life touched by silent battles and hidden pain. What truly happened away from the cameras? What struggles did the world never see? In this story, we take you beyond the glamour to others explode overnight, shifting the very shape of the industry. Stella Tennant's rise was one of those rare, unforgettable moments, a story that began not in the glitz of Paris or Milan, but in the quiet hills of Scotland, far away from the chaos of runways and flashing cameras. Stella wasn't chasing stardom. Born into an aristocratic family, she had grown up surrounded by art, countryside charm, and a deep sense of individuality. She dressed for herself, not for attention. Her style was a mix of tomboy practicality and punk rebellion. Oversized sweaters, secondhand trousers, and an occasional nose ring she'd pierce herself with a safety pin. She had no dreams of becoming a supermodel. If anything, fashion seemed like a world for other people, glossy, polished, and unreachable. But fate has a way of choosing its own path. One afternoon, Karl Lagerfeld's team made a call that would change everything. The voice on the other end of the line spoke with quiet authority. Mr. Lagerfeld would like to meet Miss Tennant tomorrow in Paris. For most aspiring models, this would have been the opportunity of a lifetime, something worth dropping everything for. But Stella almost said no. She wasn't a girl who lived for designer spotlights or couture gowns. Yet this wasn't just any designer. This was Karl Lagerfeld, the man who had brought Chanel back from the brink, turning it into a billion-dollar empire. When Karl called, you didn't hesitate. The meeting was set at the legendary Chanel atelier on Rue Cambon. Stella walked in to find Lagerfeld in his signature uniform, crisp high collar, black suit, and dark sunglasses, his silver ponytail gleaming under the lights. He didn't greet her like a stranger. He studied her like a puzzle he'd been waiting years to solve. She wasn't just a model to him. She was the missing piece in Chanel's story. Coco Chanel had once revolutionized women's fashion, freeing them from corsets and introducing an elegance that felt effortless. But that was the rebellion of the 1920s. By the 1990s, Lagerfeld needed a new kind of revolution, one that spoke to a generation growing tired of the polished glamour of supermodels. He found it in Stella, angular, androgynous, and unapologetically herself. She didn't fit the mold of traditional beauty. She was sharper, stronger, more dangerous. Their first campaign together was nothing short of explosive. Shot by Lagerfeld himself, Stella wore the iconic Chanel tweed suit. But instead of looking like a delicate lady, she looked like a warrior. Her buzz cut shimmered under the lights. Her gaze could slice through glass. The fashion world had never seen anything like it. Almost overnight, the Stella look became the obsession of the decade.
Stella Tennant managed to have a 30-year career, and her look really did transcend trends. It transcended
hair salons filled with women asking for her close-cropped style. Androgyny became aspirational. At a time when the industry adored the curvy glamour of Cindy Crawford and the bombshell appeal of Pamela Anderson, Stella's sharp, intellectual beauty felt like a rebellion of its own. But Stella wasn't just Chanel's muse. She was a shapeshifter. At Versace, she stomped the runway like a fearless gladiator. At Alexander McQueen, she became living art, wrapped in theatrical creations that blurred the line between clothing and sculpture. Calvin Klein captured her in minimalism so pure it felt rebellious. Every designer wanted her, but none could duplicate her essence. She carried contradictions like jewels. She was aristocratic, yet approachable. Avant-garde, yet timeless. Masculine, yet undeniably feminine. She could turn a couture gown into battle armor, or make a plain t-shirt look like high fashion. By 1996, Stella Tennant was everywhere. Magazine covers, high-profile campaigns, and front-row seats at every major fashion week. Isabella Blow, one of fashion's most eccentric and respected editors, once described her as absolutely wild, like a bird that could never be caged. But behind the effortless image, the pace was grueling. Stella later admitted that during her first 5 years, she walked as many as 75 shows each season. The world saw her as cool and collected, but the truth was exhausting. The natural look people loved wasn't natural at all. It took hours of preparation, a team of stylists, and an endless schedule. She had become famous for her authenticity, yet her authenticity was now curated for the cameras. The irony wasn't lost on her. Still, her career kept soaring. She became a muse for photographers like Steven Meisel and Mario Testino, each capturing different sides of her personality. She worked with designers as varied as Jean-Paul Gaultier, Burberry, and Hermès, proving she could adapt to any vision without losing her own identity. Stella also became a fixture in editorial spreads for Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and W, each time pushing the boundaries of what a fashion shoot could be. And unlike many models, she didn't treat fashion as a lifetime sentence. She took breaks, stepped back when she needed to, and built a life outside of the spotlight. From that first meeting with Karl Lagerfeld to her final seasons on the runway, Stella Tennant proved that a true muse isn't just someone who inspires art. They become part of it. She wasn't a passing trend. She was a shift in the cultural fabric of fashion, the spark that showed the world beauty can be fierce, strange, and entirely one's own. But how did Stella Tennant start? Let's find out. The Tennant family estate in the Scottish borders was no ordinary farm. It stretched across 1,500 acres of rolling green hills, dotted with sheep, and kissed by the soft mist of the countryside. This was the land where history was stitched into the soil, where aristocracy met agriculture. It was part of the world of Chatsworth House, home to the Cavendish family, a dynasty whose roots ran deep into Britain's social history. Stella Tennant's mother, Lady Emma Cavendish, was the daughter of the Duke of Devonshire. She had grown up in one of England's most extraordinary stately homes, surrounded by centuries-old paintings, marble statues, and rooms grand enough to host royalty. Stella's father, Tobias Tennant, was a gentleman farmer, practical, artistic, and quietly rebellious. He had a creative streak that didn't always fit the rigid mold of old money expectations. Together, they raised their family in an environment steeped in tradition, but with undercurrents of independence. This was old money, real money, the kind that came with inherited titles, well-bred manners, and a life plan already drawn up at birth. For most daughters in families like this, the road was clear. A proper education, possibly a finishing school, an advantageous marriage, a schedule of charity galas, and occasional mentions in Tatler. But Stella Tennant was never going to walk that road. Born in December 1970, she arrived in the world with a spark that seemed to resist every expectation her background could place on her. Even as a child, she was spirited, stubborn, and independent-minded. While other aristocratic girls might have been content learning piano and attending etiquette lessons, Stella preferred being outside, getting muddy, and experimenting with her appearance in ways that startled her family. Her mother had been raised in a world where elegance meant perfectly styled hair and carefully chosen pearls. Stella, by contrast, was fascinated by subculture aesthetics, the kind of fashion that didn't care about rules. At 16, in a move that horrified her parents and scandalized family friends, she took a pair of scissors and buzzed her hair down to a cropped, boyish cut. That haircut would later become her signature, but at the time, it was a defiant break from tradition. She didn't stop there. She pierced her own nose with a safety pin, another shock to her aristocratic circle. For Stella, it wasn't just about rebellion. It was about rejecting the scripted version of femininity she had been born into. Growing up surrounded by oil portraits of perfectly coiffed ancestors, she knew exactly what was expected of her, and she wanted the opposite. Her parents hoped these were passing teenage experiments that would fade when she left for university. But when she enrolled at the Winchester School of Art to study sculpture, it became clear that this wasn't a phase. It was who she was. At Winchester, Stella thrived creatively. She wore vintage men's clothing, paired with heavy boots and unpolished accessories. Her style was more punk club than country manner, but it wasn't a performance. It was her authentic way of moving through the world. She was deeply immersed in her art, spending long hours in the studio shaping clay, welding metal, and creating installations. "I grew up with art around me," she later explained. "I was very interested in art as a teenager and went to art school to study sculpture. Art inspires me to see things differently." Her ambitions were firmly set in the art world. She imagined opening her own studio, exhibiting her work in galleries, and creating pieces that challenged how people saw the world. She had no interest in glossy magazines or runway lights. Modeling wasn't even a thought in her mind. But while Stella was focused on sculpture, the fashion world was undergoing its own quiet transformation. The supermodel era of the early 90s, defined by the bombshell beauty of women like Cindy Crawford, Claudia Schiffer, and Linda Evangelista, was at its peak. Yet some editors and photographers were growing restless. They wanted something different, a face that broke the mold. That opportunity came in 1993. Stephen Meisel, one of the most powerful fashion photographers in the world, was preparing a shoot for British Vogue. Meisel was famous for spotting unique beauty before anyone else. He had a gift for making his subjects unforgettable, transforming them from unknowns into icons. The shoot was called Anglo-Saxon Attitudes, a high fashion celebration of British beauty. But Meisel didn't want the usual type of model. He was looking for people who looked real, people whose beauty told a story instead of selling a fantasy. A casting director working on the project had heard whispers about a young art student with aristocratic roots, a buzz cut, and an effortlessly cool edge. She sounded unlike anyone else in the industry. Out of curiosity, they reached out to her. Stella walked into the London studio without makeup, wearing ripped jeans and a vintage band t-shirt. She had no professional experience, no portfolio, and no interest in playing the part of a model. The waiting room was filled with tall, polished women who had perfected their poses in the mirror for years. Stella sat quietly, likely wondering why she had agreed to come at all. When she stepped in front of Micelle, everything shifted. He noticed the sharp lines of her face, her piercing blue eyes, and her androgynous presence, both soft and fierce at the same time. She moved with a kind of unconscious authority, as if she owned the space without trying. The first few shots were awkward. Stella didn't know how to angle herself or find the light, but Micelle saw something in her hesitation. "Stop trying," he told her. "Just be." That simple instruction unlocked something. Stella stopped thinking about modeling and started existing in the moment. The camera captured her rawness, her refusal to conform. The images were electric, her cropped hair giving luxury clothes an edge, her aristocratic bone structure making rebellion look regal. When the shoot was published, it caused an instant stir. Editors and designers wanted to know who she was. The industry, tired of predictable beauty, had found something new. Stella Tennant's look didn't just stand out, it redefined what was possible in fashion. Within weeks, she was getting calls from major names. Casting directors wanted her for runway shows. Photographers wanted her for campaigns. But one phone call eclipsed all the rest. A call from Paris, from Karl Lagerfeld himself. Lagerfeld had seen Meisel's images and was captivated. Known for his sharp instincts, he recognized that Stella had the exact presence Chanel needed.
It's a huge honor to be recognized by the industry, and I started in London a long time ago, and it's very nice to still be here because I still enjoy what I do.
Coco Chanel had once freed women from corsets and redefined elegance in the 1920s. Now, in the 90s, Lagerfeld needed a new kind of rebellion, one that blended aristocratic grace with punk energy.
A mix of aristocratic, elegance, but sort of a rebellious punk attitude. I think that juxtaposition.
Stella was the embodiment of that vision. When Lagerfeld's assistant called to arrange a meeting, Stella almost declined, but the truth was simple. When Karl Lagerfeld called, you went. Their meeting at the Chanel atelier on Rue Cambon would mark the beginning of one of the most defining chapters in her career. Lagerfeld, dressed in his signature high collar and dark glasses, studied her with the precision of a sculptor examining a masterpiece. She wasn't just another face, she was the future of the brand. Soon after, Stella became the face of Chanel in campaigns shot by Lagerfeld himself. Her buzz cut gleamed under studio lights. She wore the iconic tweed suit not like a piece of delicate couture, but like armor. Her stare, cool and unwavering, could cut through the page. The response was immediate. Hair salons filled with women asking for Stella's crop. Androgyny became aspirational. The industry, which had been captivated by glamorous supermodels, now craved something sharper, more intellectual. From there, her career exploded. She walked for Versace, Alexander McQueen, Calvin Klein, Burberry, and Hermes. She graced the covers of Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and countless others. Each designer used her differently. McQueen made her into living art, Calvin Klein turned minimalism into rebellion, and Versace gave her the armor of a runway warrior. Yet despite the whirlwind, Stella remained grounded. She saw modeling not as a lifestyle, but as a chapter in her life, a career she could step away from whenever she chose, and that was perhaps her greatest power. However, as they say, nothing lasts forever. By the late 1990s, Stella Tennant had reached a place many models only dream of. Her face was everywhere. Glossy magazines, billboards, catwalks in Paris, Milan, and New York. Designers adored her. Photographers chased her.
She always seemed relevant to one designer or another, or multiple per season. She was constantly cast in shows, campaigns.
Yet under the bright lights and behind the perfect pictures, something was quietly breaking. She once admitted in her straightforward way, "I didn't really know if I wanted to open the door and see what was inside. I thought it was a big, shallow world, and I wasn't sure I liked the look of it." Those words said more than she probably intended. Fashion had built her into a character, Sahi, the aristocratic rebel. Every photo shoot leaned into it. The edgy short hair, the sharp cheekbones, the cool, untouchable stare. Every runway, every advertisement, every profile kept repeating the same story about her. To the public, it was effortless. To Stella, it was a performance. The trouble was, she wasn't rebelling anymore. She was pretending to rebel. That image had made her famous, but it had also trapped her. The world expected her to stay frozen in time, forever the fresh-faced, sharp-edged outsider who had crashed into fashion's inner circle. But real life doesn't freeze like a photograph. In 1999, Stella married David Lasnet, a French photographer she had met during a shoot. He understood the world she lived in, the pressure, the speed, the constant eyes watching. He also saw the person under the public image. Marriage brought Stella something she had longed for since she was young, a sense of safety. She wanted the life her aristocratic upbringing had promised, Not the titles or ballrooms, but the quieter dreams, a home, children, days where she could make tea in the kitchen without having to catch a flight in the evening. Over the next few years, Stella and David had 4 children: Marcel, Cecily, Jasmine, and Iris. The babies came quickly, and so did the joy. She loved being a mother. It was the one role she could play without pretending. For a while, it seemed like she had found her exit from the endless cycle of shows and shoots. But fashion has a long memory for faces it loves, and it wasn't ready to let her go. Even as Stella stepped away, the phone calls kept coming. The offers were tempting, not just financially, but creatively. Designers wanted her back, and the sums being offered could make anyone hesitate. She said yes to some, no to others. But every yes was another step back toward the world she'd tried to leave. In the beginning, Stella had been a breath of fresh air to fashion. But the industry is built on a cruel rule. Youth is celebrated, but it must somehow last forever. No one tells you how to age in an environment that refuses to acknowledge aging exists. Stella was still beautiful, still magnetic, but now her beauty told a different story. The cheekbones were the same, but time had added fine lines. Marks of laughter, of sleepless nights with children, of a life actually lived. In a normal world, this was called character. In fashion, it was a countdown. The campaigns became fewer. When they came, they were framed differently. She was no longer the rebellious newcomer. She was the timeless beauty, the elegant muse. She understood what that meant. By 2020, Stella's marriage of 21 years was over. The public statement was polite, mutual decision, committed to friendship, focused on the children. But in truth, it was the loss of one of her strongest anchors. Her children were older now, stepping into their own lives. Her career was quieter. The image that had once made her powerful now felt irrelevant. The aristocratic rebel belonged to another time, and yet, even in stillness, the old pressures remained. Fashion didn't just take pictures of her, it had shaped her identity. Now that she was outside the spotlight, she faced a harder question. Who was she without it? The year 2020 was supposed to be about reinvention. The divorce was behind her. She was free to choose what her life would look like without compromise. But freedom can be a strange, heavy thing, especially for someone who has always been told who they are. Then the pandemic hit. Fashion shows stopped. Shoots were canceled. The whole industry froze overnight. For the first time in decades, Stella was completely still. She was back in Scotland, on the land where she'd grown up, the same rolling hills and quiet fields where she had once chopped her hair short and decided she would not live by other people's rules. But the young woman who had done that was long gone. This time, there was no thrill of rebellion, no rush of change. There was only exhaustion. The countryside was beautiful, but it was also silent. For someone who had lived her adult life in the constant hum of cameras, stylists, and chatter, the quiet could be deafening. She had always been private, but now privacy became isolated. Friends noticed she seemed more fragile. The confidence she had once worn like armor felt thin. Her family later said gently that Stella had been unwell for some time. She was loved deeply, but she was wrestling with questions that love alone could not answer. Who was she when she wasn't being photographed? What was her worth without the image the world had built for her? On December 22, 2020, just 5 days after her 50th birthday, the news came. Stella Tennant had passed away at her home in Scotland. The official cause was her taking her own life, but the truth was more complicated. The end of a long road of pressure, identity struggles, and the exhausting task of living up to a version of herself that the world wouldn't let her outgrow. Her death sent a shock through the fashion world. Tributes flooded in, from designers she had inspired, photographers who had captured her, and younger models who had followed the trail she blazed. But the most powerful words came from strangers, teenagers who had seen in Stella's sharp, unconventional beauty a kind of permission. Women who had learned from her that you could be different and still be beautiful. Karl Lagerfeld, who had worked closely with Stella and had passed away the year before her, once said she would outlive them all. In a way, he was right. Her legacy isn't just in the photographs or the runway moments. It's in the way she changed the conversation about beauty. She showed that power could be soft, that femininity could be androgynous, that rebellion could be graceful. Her life also left a warning. The same industry that celebrates individuality can be unkind to the people who embody it. The pressure to stay authentic in a way that fits a brand can be as suffocating as any traditional beauty standard. Stella Tennant's story will always be about more than fashion. It's about courage, the courage to be different, and also the courage it takes to live as a real person behind a public image. The cameras have stopped, but her influence hasn't. Every time someone chooses to look like themselves instead of what they're told to look like, Stella's spirit is there. She was an aristocrat, a mother, an artist, and an icon. And she leaves behind a lesson that outlives every runway show and magazine cover. You are more than what the world decides you are. But even after she passed, Her legacy lives on forever in the hearts of those who love her. Stella Tennant's life and work left a deep mark, not only in fashion, but in how people thought about beauty, identity, and staying true to themselves. She was many things at once: an aristocrat who became a fashion legend, a sculpture student who brought something new and bold to the runway, and a strong voice for living responsibly toward the planet.